This episode brought to you by Policy Genius, the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic guy. Remember it so you don't have to. Let's talk about the X-Men cartoon. I know I talked about it a lot. In fact, most people have. It's no secret that this was a groundbreaking cartoon based on the hit Marvel comic. It not only had all the action and one-liners that we love, but it gave us compelling stories, challenging characters, and timeless themes and issues about prejudice, identity, and sacrifice. Truth be told, there's little I could say that could add any more to what I or many other fans have already said in the past. But that's why this time I have a little surprise. This previously on X-Men hat that just goes magnificently with my outfit and the developers of X-Men! Yeah, shouldn't have dissed the hat. Please give it up for X-Men writer Julia Lewald and of course X-Men showrunner Eric Lewald.
Bye.
You two played a big part, if not the biggest part, in making X-Men one of the most amazing action cartoons ever made. So thank you so much for coming on to celebrate it and not just to sell something. Now let's first get off the bat that even though you oversaw everything from beginning to end, it wasn't your idea to get X-Men on TV. Whose idea was it?
It was Margaret Loesch's entirely. She was would worked at Marvel Productions. She wanted X-Men on the screen. No one would put it there. As soon as she became a president of a kids network, she put it on the air. It was all her doing.
This was obviously a passion project because she kept taking X-Men from studio to studio and constantly getting rejected. Even when she was the head of Marvel Television, which even they weren't interested. It wasn't until she became the president of Fox Kids that she finally decided to make the show herself, pushing it hard on this brand new network.
If you want something done right.
But maybe that's because studios thought kids weren't ready for a show like X-Men. What was the environment like for action children's shows back then?
Everything was softer, even what was purportedly an action show at the time.
Like Super Friends.
In the great hall of the Justice League, there are assembled the world's 4 greatest heroes.
I've heard you've been a busy alien, Darkseid.
There's a lot of standing around and chatting, and there wasn't really a lot of serious stakes involved. Most of the people involved in our show were serious comic book fans and felt that we needed the show to be as realistic as the comics were.
Now, some may or may not know that there was one attempt prior to make X-Men a cartoon called Pride of the X-Men. But with hokey dialogue, cheesy storytelling, and an Australian Wolverine.
Get with it! The X-Men don't have room for whiny brats!
This surprisingly didn't go over well. What impact did this pilot have making the show, and how did they confuse Canadian for Australian?
Margaret Loesch had been working on other shows, and she actually took the budget from the 13th episode of the series and spent it to create Pride of the X-Men as a sales tool to show the networks how good an X-Men show could look. And the ending result, even though they put a good budget on it and had some very talented people working on it, it was a bit of a mishmash, and some of the creative decisions were poor.
It is good, little one. Colossus like rain.
Around that time there was a blockbuster hit come out called Crocodile Dundee about an Australian gentleman, and one of the higher-ups above Margaret decided, well, that's a big hit film, kids are into Australia, make Wolverine Australian.
So that's why Captain Marvel is suddenly from Wakanda.
And so that was the kind of creative decision that was made. It was more of a sales tool made by marketers, and as a result, the story really didn't hold together very well, and it wasn't persuasive. It didn't make the networks think that it was time for an X-Men show.
A minor poet for a minor obstacle.
But in its way, it sort of stiffened the spine of Margaret and Will Mineo and Larry Houston. When they got their next shot at putting an X-Men show somehow on the air, they were determined to make it right.
Well, after that failed attempt at a series, how is it that X-Men finally got greenlit, and is it true that Margaret Loesch actually put her job on the line?
Yes, she put her job on the line.
Right, when she was hired at Fox, she told her boss, the first 2 shows I'm going to make are X-Men and Batman.
I have never met this woman, but I instantly love her.
The boss said, well, Batman's been a hit movie, we kind of buy that, but I don't see this X-Men thing. It's too adult, kids aren't going to buy it, our advertisers aren't going to like it.
No one knows who they are.
No one knows who they are. They don't know what a mutant is. I don't know what a mutant is.
I hear you don't like mutants. Well, we don't much like you. Ah!
But Margaret said, believe me, this is the best Marvel property out there. This will make a great television show. So her boss said, look, I'll roll the dice with you. I hired you. I trust your judgment. But if this fails, you're gone. This was not a hidden thing. Her job was on the line when she committed to making the X-Men.
Yikes. Well, with so much laid on the table, she obviously got really good people behind it. So how was the developing team put together?
Well, in February 1992, our home phone number rang, and you answered it.
And it was Sidney Iwander, who's Margaret's Lush's right-hand guy at Fox, who's been with her forever, who I'd worked for before.
On the season 2 of Beetlejuice.
On Beetlejuice the year before.
I always wondered why Lydia sounded like Jubilee.
We want you and Mark Edens, the head of the writing, and we got Will Mineo and Larry Houston to be in charge of the art, and we're going to make the X-Men.
So obviously X-Men had to be something very different from other kid shows at the time. Were there any rules or core values that you tried to uphold?
Well, Eric and I met writing for what was then the Disney Afternoon. Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Goof Troop, Tailspin, those shows.
You have too many good things!
There were very specific rules in place about what you could and couldn't do, specifically in children's animation. Then you get the call for X-Men, and suddenly those kinds of rules are out the window.
And it really comes down to Margaret Lush and Sidney Iwander. This was not Marvel's show. They were a very small company at the time. They didn't have the creative clout on this. It was Margaret and Sidney decided they wanted this to be a serious, adult, challenging show that would be different from any other show. And besides the fact that they respected the comics, they knew that Fox was a tiny network and they were trying to compete with the big guys that had 95% of the viewing audience at the time. So they wanted something different. They wanted something edgier. They wanted something that would grab people's attention. So when they committed to X-Men and Batman, they told both staffs, do not dumb this down. Forget about the kind of limitations you had in the last 20 years working in this business. Make these things as tough and adult as the comics are.
The brave are always the first to die.
As a writer on the show, it happens to be a half-hour animated show for Saturday morning, but this is live-action, hour-length drama stakes for prime time.
We told our writers, you're making a movie. You're making a movie for yourself. This is a group of 30-year-olds who are thrown together and they're fighting for real stakes and make the shows adult, make their emotions adult. Write this for you, don't write this down. We were given that green light by the network, by Margaret and Sidney.
Now, you mentioned in your book that even though the writers seemed to be on the same page, the advertisers were not. They didn't understand how to translate the show into toys, which seems very ironic given how many there still are. But with that in mind, what were some of their ideas to work in product placements in the show? Did I hear correctly they wanted you to write in Wolverine-shaped walkie-talkies?
You did. Since there had never been a successful Marvel animated show before, they didn't really have many toys or much merchandise set up. But as soon as the show was successful, we got these frantic phone calls saying, can you put something in? We've got some walkie-talkies, we've got pajamas, we've got some curtains. Is there any way you can sneak them in the show? We've told the people that are selling these things that they'll be in the show.
Do I have a choice?
And we just said no.
Well, I think Gambit would have looked great in pajamas with his face on it. And you could have made Beast a seamstress. Use your imaginations.
There was a deal with some, I believe it was Australian fast food toys, kind of like Happy Meals toys. And whoever was at Marvel had promised them that they'd show up in the television show. And they said, we're not going to have Wolverine have toy Wolverines in his bedroom.
Get a clue!
Ironically, the late great Stan Lee even didn't understand the tone of the show, despite him being the one that created the X-Men. In the book, you bring up how he wanted to do a live-action introduction with himself in every episode and discuss what the lesson was going to be that they learned by the end. Because it works so great in Hammerman?
This is Stan Lee of Marvel Comics warning you to look around you. Your classmates, your friends, you never know which one of them may be a mutant.
As one of your chapters asks, how do you say no to Stan Lee?
With great difficulty. in front of all my bosses. There was a generational difference. We all loved and respected Stan and appreciated that he'd come up with the characters in the early 60s. But when the X-Men got reborn in the 70s,
With Len Wein.
with Len Wein as the and Chris Claremont,
John
Byrne, they came up with a very new X-Men. The early X-Men had been American teenagers, all basically dressed the same, and the characters were not that distinct. The new X-Men were tougher, older, distinct, worldly people from all over the planet. The stories from the mid-70s on were much more adult. Stan had not been involved with the X-Men since 1963 and really didn't care for the new stories, and so he very much wanted the show to be like what he came up with in the early 60s. It just didn't fit. We needed a garage band, and he was telling us how great Pat Boone records were. The tone couldn't work, and I believed it, and all the creative people believed it, but there's such respect for Stan that we all heard him out. And it was the moment that I had to say that, look, if you want Stan to supervise the scripts, fine, go with that, and you'll change the tone to that one. But if you need it to be me, I need it to be the way we've already worked on it for a couple months.
Now that is a shame.
As you mentioned, X-Men goes all the way back to the 60s, which means tons of changes over time, as well as tons of X-Men. How did you choose the characters to be the main cast?
Yeah, there were a lot of partners. There was Marvel, who had its interest in some of their newer characters like Gambit and Cable, who were just coming out. Fox, who wanted to make sure that they were popular characters. Another partnering project was Saban. They didn't much care. But what happened was there was a group of us. There was a big meeting, 20, 30 people, and everybody threw out who they thought they might be. And we came up with the 5 or 6 core characters. Xavier and Wolverine, absolutely a given, and Cyclops. We wanted a balance. Rogue was fairly recent, but she worked well for animation. That's another thing. The artists were talking, who can animate well? Well, characters that fly animate well. So Rogue and Storm had a leg up on people. They're much more fun to watch in animation than somebody with a less fun power.
Did you see what she did?
Yes, Rogue has a way with men.
And then what happened, there were half a dozen chosen there at the beginning. We went off to write, Mark Edens and I went out to lay out the first 13 episodes.
Assuming it would only be 13 episodes.
Assuming it would only be 13 because we were only hired for one season. Mm-hmm. They had little faith it would be successful.
Sounds like the same people who negotiated the Star Wars toys.
We find ourselves more and more using a couple, 3 characters that hadn't been committed to in the original meeting. One of them was Beast. We loved writing for Beast. We put Beast in jail in the early on in episode 3 because he wasn't going to be a main character. We just, okay, well, he's had a couple episodes, we'll see him again. He asserted himself. Jean Grey asserted herself because even though they didn't think that she was that commercial a character, we found that everybody in the X-Men had a relationship with her like they had with almost no one else. Mm-hmm. So she became kind of an emotional core. So much like in live action television show where a good actor might make a small character grow and grow over the course of a season, some of these characters like Beast and Jean and even Xavier, who they thought might be kind of in the background, they asserted themselves. We needed them to tell the best stories, and so as we wrote, we focused on them even though we hadn't been told to.
You had the heart, the core that you picked out for the X-Men team, but Jubilee was chosen as opposed to Kitty Pryde.
As the way in. They tried it on Kitty Pryde, we did it. 90% of our audience didn't know who the X-Men were, so in the pilot we needed a new person to come in, and that was going to be Jubilee, to find out what the X-Men were all about, along with the audience. She did that absolutely beautifully, and that was her initial reason for being part of the team.
How did you do that?
With style, Petit, with style.
A lot of why these characters worked so well was because of the kick-ass voice actors that brought them to life. But picking them wasn't always an easy task, as the original casting sounded less like an X-Men cartoon and more like a Yogi Bear cartoon.
The voice talent, for financial reasons, was happening in Canada. There was a lag time back then. It's easy to forget, but the internet wasn't the way it was right now. And things that happened in one spot, you literally had to put it in an envelope and mail it back and forth. So there wasn't the immediate real-time ability to say this is right, that's wrong. There had not been a show like this before.
Right, and so when we sent our scripts and our instructions about the show we wanted to the people in Canada, who Fox had used before for Beetlejuice and other shows, and so there's a good history there, they didn't quite understand that we wanted a completely different show. So the first recordings, the audio cassettes we got mailed back, very much sounded like Scooby-Doo.
Like Zoink, Scoob, and Sabretooth! Uh-oh!
It was very cartoony. It was not at all like the X-Men that you see it all today, and all of us down here in Los Angeles just collapsed and thought, well, the show's done.
This game is over.
We went up to Toronto, sat down with them and explained. We were basically telling adult dramas. We weren't telling little kid shows. And to please have another run at it. And so they understood, so there was a miscommunication problem. Some of the same actors read again and did fine, but they also reached out. They thought, well, we want to try extra hard to make sure we get a serious cast here. They reached out to the Toronto theater community, which is huge.
Live theater.
Live theater. And so we got a bunch of these Shakespearean actors like Professor X and Magneto and Beast, people who were used to holding the stage and really getting some gravitas into the drama.
And future politicians. No joke, in Nova Scotia, that's what the voice of Rogue is now. Talk about doing everything.
Ain't that enough?
So you got the cast, you got the writing, all that's missing is a kick-ass intro. What went into making that awesome opening?
The minute opening was drawn by Larry Houston and Will Mineo. Those guys are so amazing that was basically just like a draft and a half over a weekend. Larry did a 1 minute opening. Margaret Lesh looked at it and said, could you change a few things? Will did a small pass on it. And what you see is what the two of them did in a couple days.
There's people who couldn't make it that good in a couple years.
The music was coming from a fellow who was also on staff at Saban, a fellow named Ron Wasserman. On staff and was getting paid X amount of dollars per week, for writing 2 tunes, writing 200 tunes. He wasn't getting more.
It sets up our show in such a way, I mean, again, with all these characters that no one knows what they do, no one knows their powers, there's no narration there, we considered that. In 1 minute, they show you everything, and they show you what the X-Men were in that.
Eureka!
So everything was set to go until suddenly, it wasn't. And it seemingly looked like big trouble might be on the horizon. We'll go more into that right after the break, but if we're gonna do a commercial, let's do it the X-Men way. Character in trouble! No!
We'll be right back. Now, back to our program.
With all the pieces seemingly in place, it looked like there was only one tiny element that seemed almost completely wrong. That little thing known as the animation.
It was a real rush to start with. Batman had been in development for about a year.
Yes.
And we had about a week.
So X-Men was really trying to be different. And another thing you and Mark Edens decided to do was come up with, for those first 13, again, thinking they would be the only 13. What are the best 13 stories you can tell? And comic books are sequential. They're stories that go over more than one book. And you two made the bold decision to tell stories that arc over an entire season that are not self-contained in a single episode.
Right, which was actually, Will Mineo and got Fox to make that decision. It's a big business decision because what happened, and in fact, was the first 2 episodes looked okay, the third one didn't, and had to be redone almost completely. You can't start putting things on the air if you don't have next week's show ready.
You couldn't run 4 because you couldn't run 3.
It would be quite disconcerting if this were to detonate.
And part of the problem was, first of all, it's a brand new show. There are always some problems when you're dealing with an animation house. Another problem was there was a serious miscommunication or difference of opinion, let's say, between what Margaret Lesh wanted and thought was in the contract for the quality of the show and what Chaim Saban, who was in charge of producing it for her, was actually telling the people in Korea that they were going to pay for. So when we saw the first animation come back, it was really, really not the quality that you... Again, it's one of those moments where you curl up and say, the show is over.
I knew the existence of the X-Men would be revealed to the public one day, but not like this.
Fox and Saban fought out their budget differences. They got back into it. They started making the show look better. Well, we're a month behind.
You look nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs.
Again, it's 1992, and things premiered in September.
Yeah.
That's when new shows rolled out. That's when the shows that were currently on the air began their new series of episodes.
And so this was a huge decision. Suddenly, like, well, what do? You put the first couple episodes on and repeat them, 7 times until the 3rd one's ready. And so Margaret Lesh made the decision. She said, I'm not going to put the show on until it's right. She had to go to all the advertisers who had hundreds of thousands of dollars in advertising.
All the affiliates.
All the couple hundred affiliate stations, and say, I promised you a new show, this exciting new show I've been pitching you, but it won't be ready for 4 months. So for 4 months you're going to show reruns, you're going to lose money, it's not going to be right, but when it comes out in January, it'll be worth it.
Don't worry, Cher, your insurance can handle it.
But you all worked around what at the time seemed like a step backwards, but actually turned out was a blessing in disguise.
She had 2 good episodes. She said, wait a minute, let's get the fans into this and get them excited about January. Let's show them in October, and we did, and that's why there was a sneak preview.
Watch a sneak preview of X-Men next Saturday on Fox.
But the sneak preview also happened on Halloween 1992. It happened in prime time,
Yeah.
and it was treated as a big spectacle. But I thought every kid in America is going to be out trick-or-treating. Who's going to be home to watch an animated show on Halloween
But the
night?
fans were there, and it proved Margaret right. And to show you how excited the fans were about the show, they had a Fox Kids Club write-in campaign saying, what's your favorite show on Fox Kids?
Take over the network for a weekend.
Kids, which are the shows you chose for the Fox Kids TV takeover?
The suspense is killing me.
X-Men got more votes than all the other shows put together. So they re-showed the piloting, the first 2 episodes again.
In November
on Thanksgiving. And so it had shown twice before the official premiere in January.
Had enough Cajun? Just say oncle.
I, like a lot of kids at the time, was blown away by the preview and sucked in by all the other episodes that followed. What was your reaction seeing that all the hard work and risk-taking not only paid off but gave Fox Kids its biggest show at the time?
It didn't feel real, just because at that time, again, the internet didn't exist. There was no real-time response or reaction that we could gauge sitting at our desks with our computers. I went to the studio one day, Fox Kids Studio, part of the Fox network out here in Los Angeles, and just casually mentioned, so how's the show being received? What kind of reaction are you guys getting? And Fox Kids Club had little postcards that you could write down what you liked and you could mail it in. Charlotte Fullerton takes me and escorts me to a hallway. The hallway was lined down one side, down the other, all the way up to the ceiling, all the way up to the ceiling here with these big crate things, and they were all stuffed with postcards from kids who wrote in to say that they loved X-Men. And this was when you had to get a stamp, you had to have an address. Writing a postcard was not, the casual thing of tapping something on a keyboard these days. And to see that, it made it real for me, that the show had found an audience.
Life don't get much better than this.
There were mornings that half the country was watching it, but that really wasn't tangible to us, I think, until we started meeting fans later, say at Comic-Cons, and got a sense of how the entire world had a chance of watching the show and ended up really liking it. We were suddenly then thrown into, well, come up with season 2, so we didn't really have time to sit back and appreciate it.
And can I also add, you were done.
We were all let go. So when the show became successful, the minute they found out instead of having a flop, they had a #1 hit, they had to call us all up and ask us to come back and work again.
Security. Are any of us ever truly secure?
And luckily most of us were available, but that was a slightly awkward moment for them professionally.
Got bit by a dog, too.
Now, of course, Batman had more time in development and was also tapping into similar themes and ideas, but in a different way. Was there any kind of competitive nature with them?
Playful rivalry.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very small community here. We all knew each other. Will Mineo and Larry Houston, who were in charge of the art on our show, had each done a couple storyboards for Batman since it had gotten started about a year earlier. And Alan Burnett, who's an old friend of mine, was basically the guy supervising the Batman show. Both shows were so thrilled that they were successful. For every 5 shows that you end up doing, maybe 1 becomes successful. We were both so enjoying that I don't think there's much time for rivalry. The fact that we had a good run there for 4 or 5 years, we were all caught up in that. Both sides were. To give them credit, they motivated us because we saw early footage of Batman before we got started, and they had such wonderful budgets and such beautiful art. We don't have the budget to compete with that. We're going to compete by making the shows twice as fast paced. In fact, there was a specific decision made. Batman might have so many scenes in a 22-minute. We would have 50, 60, 70% more. We'd be really moving faster, because if you lingered on the quality of our animation, you'd start seeing some of the seams in it. But if we doubled the amount of story, then that would be our distinction versus the Batman show.
And one credit also to Sharon Janis.
Right, our editor.
The editor of the show, who really kept the pace up.
Well, with the first season being such a smash, what were some of the changes you wanted to make going forward?
Interestingly, they were worried about the sequential nature of the first 13 and the possible production delays again. So we were told we couldn't do 26 in a row, whatever.
What bug crawled up her shorts?
To get around that, we would do 2-parters, 4 and 5-parters like the Phoenix Sagas. And in the second season, we even had that little thing with the Savage Land that we put a minute of at the end of each one, so that it felt like a continuation over 13.
Much like Batman, the animation over the series went through several different changes. Was this a stylistic choice or out of necessity?
Money. All about the money.
Yeah. Chaim Saban from the beginning was looking for ways to do the show for half the price that we were spending. There was an attempt at the beginning of the third season with the Lady Deathstrike episode to try a different animation house, a Philippine house, who did a nice job. They did that as a pitch to see if they might take over from the Korean studio that was doing it and do it cheaper. They did a nice job, but we stayed with ACOM. Somehow Fox had, Chaim got the ability to dictate a big budget cut. So many of you remember the 5th season not looking like the first 4 seasons. And the reason for that was that it was sent to a different production house and the budget was cut. All the weaknesses, all the losses that you saw in that simply came down to it was the last season they were doing and they thought they'd save some money.
We got trouble.
Even with the budget cut on the animation, the final episode was definitely a tearjerker, making the ballsy move of essentially killing off their teacher and mentor, Xavier. Who came up with that ending and why that choice?
Season 4, you had been given marching orders. This will be the last season. There will be no season 5. So there's a 4-part episode, Beyond Good and Evil, that wraps up season 4, and that was to have wrapped up the whole series, and that was to have included the sending off of some of the X-Men, the bringing in of newer X-Men characters to make the team. Then you got the call.
Yeah, right. We'd written the entire script, which was like 150 pages for a 4-parter to end the series. 5 X-Men get 4 new ones. And then we got the call saying, oops, we need 11 more episodes. Change all that around and don't have anybody leave and don't have anybody new join.
Pig-faced runt couldn't take a joke.
By the time we got to the actual finale, it was my decision to tell that last story. You know, what would bring all the X-Men that had been involved in the first 75 episodes, all the X-Men and a couple of their most important villains, the most important characters we lived with for 5 years. What event would do that? Well, Xavier. Everybody had a relationship with Xavier. And having him pass while his friends and enemy were watching him go with love in their eyes seemed to be the most emotional way of doing it. Yeah, it still gets us now.
And again, this was on a kid's Saturday morning show, but these were big stakes.
Yeah, it never occurred to us to pull back. As with all the episodes, we just thought, what would be the most dramatic, what would be the most intense way to have this happen? And losing Xavier was it.
So after 5 seasons of awesomeness, I gotta know, what was your favorite episode to work on?
I was the writer on part 1 of Days of Future Past, which was very gratifying and a lot of fun to figure out how to thread that particular needle by using the character of Bishop as opposed to Kitty Pryde. And I had the story idea for what became Beauty and the Beast, the one where Beast finds love and realizes she loves him as well. And that was written by Stephanie Matheson.
Well, it's definitely better than the versions of Beauty and the Beast that Disney's turning out recently.
Coming up with a really effective, simple story is really hard. For me, it's the hardest part of the whole business. In the X-Men's case, it was one man's worth. You know, we all take from our favorite things. And I've been struck by a number of stories with a similar theme where, say, in City on the Edge of Forever in Star Trek, or in It's a Wonderful Life, what is the effect of one person on the world? What better to express the reason for the X-Men's existence than to show what the world would be like if the X-Men had never happened? What if Charles Xavier had been killed? And you just leap for joy when you find a story that simple and that effective that comes to you that fits with your group of characters. So that was my most satisfying story.
That 2-part episode was itself the jumping off point for what became the Age of Apocalypse in the comic books for Marvel.
A couple years later, yeah.
Yeah, especially One Man's Worth gets me every time, because we've been with these characters for 4 seasons up until this point. But then in the alternate universe where you see Storm and Wolverine are a couple, you go, of course they are. Why aren't they a couple? They're supposed to be together. It suddenly all makes sense, and it just breaks my heart every time.
Aw, even the creators are shippers.
Get a life.
So with an incredible understanding of these characters, I of course have to ask, which one's your favorite?
We just love Beast, because he was the smartest guy in the room, and we all fancied ourselves being at least marginally as smart as Beast. He just was a great character to write for.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name, would smell as sweet.
In my case, my job was to supervise a bunch of very different people. I have great empathy for Charles Xavier as the guy kind of herding cats and being the one that was responsible for the family. And so I really think I got closest to him.
And seeing how without you they probably wouldn't exist, what do you think of the movies?
I'll say this. Before X-Men the Animated Series, there was 30 years up until that point of X-Men stories. And since 2000, with the very first X-Men movie and going on, you've got a billion-dollar film franchise. I absolutely believe that. X-Men the Animated Series is that bridge. If X-Men the Animated Series hadn't happened, there would be no billion-dollar film franchise.
People fear what they do not understand.
Mankind has always feared what it doesn't understand.
And also Margaret Loesch, to her credit, as soon as X-Men the Animated Series began to sort of find its way and hit the audience hard, she went to the folks at Fox Films and said, you need to start making movies. You need to start making live-action movies about these characters. Nah, I mean, X-Men's off the year by 1997, and it's not till 2000 that they finally get together and make a feature film that begat this, like I said, billion-dollar empire.
On the plus side, the casting is so amazing.
Oh, man.
I mean, if we had sat down ourselves and thought, well, what world-class actors could we get to play parts of the characters we've been writing for 5 years, most of the choices they made for the movies were exactly the ones we would have made. So we were thrilled at that. We're thrilled they took them seriously. They're thrilled that they basically based the team on the team that we chose, and that made us feel like we had found the best way to tell X-Men movies. Out of the 9 or 10 of them, we have favorites. We have ones that we wished had been a little different. But overall, we're thrilled to watch all of them, and can't have lived with these characters for 5 years without wanting every single thing that they do to be successful. Logan was a wonderful cap to that. I mean, of all people, the last time we saw the late Len Wein, who created Wolverine and Storm and a number of other characters, he saw Logan before he died, saw the movie, and he was very impressed with it. It felt right to him as well.
Well, a lot of teenagers, and even adults for that matter, felt X-Men captured a voice that other kid shows didn't at the time. Sure, a lot of children's media talked about being an outcast or being unique, but this did it in a much darker and more creative way. And nowadays, a ton of kid shows tried to capture the same maturity that both you and Batman accomplished. How does it feel to know you paved the way for so many future kid shows to be more grown up and sophisticated?
Well, let me say this. It's an honor just to be acknowledged. And thank you so much for thinking of X-Men and Batman in those terms all these years down the road. That it had an impact on the way storytelling is approached, that it mattered to people. That's very, very gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we do this, because we hope it connects with somebody, and obviously connected with somebody in the tens of millions of people that watched, and in the people that have attempted similar series since then. When we were kids, we wanted serious stories. We wanted to be challenged, and it's good to see the people are still trying to do that.
Well, you understood that kids do want to be challenged, and you did an excellent job of it. X-Men broke so many barriers that no other show at the time had ever broken, and now, most children's action shows try to recreate it in one way or another. Even the funnier ones can be more dramatic, bring up serious issues, and not shy away from the tougher moments. X-Men was entertaining, but also taught tough life lessons. At a time when studios said that the show would be too adult and they wanted to play it safe, they forgot that kids don't want to play it safe. They're interested in things that are different, new, and challenging. X-Men knew how to always keep that in focus, and we have a great team of smart risk takers to thank for it. And if you want to know more about the making of this groundbreaking series, you can check out their book, Previously on X-Men. There's so many great stories about the making of this iconic show, and you can read all about it in great detail. Thank you so much again for not only being on the show, but for also making a great series.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remit. Wait a minute. Next month is March. You know what that means? Ted Healy Month! That's the guy who was originally with the Three Stooges. You know, they just weren't the same when he was in the group. It was kind of awkward. And granted, there's not many film clips of him, but I really feel like verbal descriptions are really gonna play a big part in this.
Why don't you do X-Men Month?
Yeah, if you like X-Men so much, why don't you dedicate a whole month to it?
Well, the X-Men movies, I guess, are interesting to talk about, but... You know what? Fine! Ted Healy's estate is gonna be very disappointed / relieved, but you know what? Let's do it! Next month, it's X Month!
Does a mall baby chili fries?
Hey, Doug Walker here doing the charity shout out, and this week we're doing the Oak Park River Forest Food Pantry. This is also part of the video series that we do called What You Can Do, that shows how you can volunteer at different organizations, and this one is really wonderful. We're going to show a little preview of it here to show that, you know, just what a great place it is, and that you can show your support. If you'd like to donate, we'll have the link there. If you want to volunteer, you can also go to the site, so enjoy this little preview, and be sure to check out the video and share it if you can, because these are really wonderful people and they do wonderful work.
I'm Michelle Zurkowski, and I'm with the Oak Park River Forest Food Pantry.
And how long has this place been here?
It's been open for 40 years.
You're celebrating the 40th
We're celebrating
year this
our
year.
40th anniversary this year. Our mission is to end hunger. So we do all we can to do that. Our biggest program, I think it's in our name, people are most familiar with it, is the food pantry. So that's a system where people come in, they shop for groceries, they leave with about a week's worth of food, and they can come once a month. Hunger exists beyond the four walls of this building, and so we try to reach hunger where it is. One of the things is the home delivery project, and that is for people who physically can't make it into the pantry. So a lot of elderly people, disabled people, people with mental health disabilities that can't come in. So we call them up, ask them what they want to eat, put together several bags worth of groceries and deliver it to their home. We also have a program in the summer. Kids, that get free and reduced lunch during the school year. When summer's on, there's no school, there's no food for those kids. So we have a variety of summer programs that are targeting those children to make sure that they get food. We have church groups, congregations of various sorts that volunteer together. So there are those kinds of options where you can, bond with your friends or your community in a broader way while also giving back to a broader community.
There's so many people that are like, what are we gonna do today? I don't know, they can't think of anything. And it's like, if you're gonna just be laying around doing nothing, it's like just coming somewhere and doing something so easy. Like you said, just packing oranges or just moving stuff, or getting, it's like it can be helping people, helping
absolutely.
a great organization.
And then you learn more about what the issues are in your community.
I think it's wonderful not only what you do here, but that just so many people that want to give, and so many organizations want to give, and just every little thing, an individual wants to give, a group wants to give, and you utilize all of it. I can just say I had kind of different ideas of what a food pantry was like, kind of what you said. I mean, it's like you always think, oh, it's going to be kind of like a downer place, but you're doing good. But it is very positive. It is very upbeat, and there's so many various ways that people can help out and volunteer. If they want to volunteer or they want to donate, when you look right at that camera and tell them where they can go online.
www.oprf, like for Oak Park River Forest, foodpantry.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thanks so much.